What makes a monster? Is it birth or is it circumstance? In the blood-soaked annals of history, few names evoke as much fear and morbid fascination as Ivan the Terrible. The name itself is a brand, a synonym for tyranny, paranoia, and cruelty on an almost unimaginable scale. He was the first Tsar of all the Russias, a man who dragged a fragmented medieval kingdom into the modern age, expanding its borders and centralizing its power. But he did so through a reign of terror so profound it left scars on the Russian psyche that arguably linger to this day. His story is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a terrifying psychological portrait of a brilliant, devout, and sensitive boy who was twisted by a childhood of horror into a paranoid despot. It's a story of love, betrayal, and madness, culminating in acts so shocking they sound like fiction. He boiled his enemies alive, unleashed a secret police force that became a symbol of state-sponsored terror, and in a fit of uncontrollable rage, committed an act that would haunt him until his dying day. He murdered his own son and heir. How did this happen? How did the great hope of Russia become its greatest nightmare? To understand the tyrant, we must first meet the orphan. Ivan was born in 1530, the long-awaited son of Grand Prince Vasily III. He was royalty, a descendant of the legendary Rurik dynasty. But this royal blood was a curse as much as a blessing. His world shattered when he was just 3 years old. His father died, leaving him as the nominal ruler of a vast and unruly land. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, acted as regent, a fierce and capable woman trying to hold the kingdom together against the circling wolves of the aristocracy, the powerful Boyar clans. But 5 years later, she too was dead, likely poisoned by those same Boyars who coveted her power. At the age of 8, Ivan was utterly alone, a pawn in a vicious game of thrones played by the Shuisky and Belsky families. They fought for control over the Kremlin and over him. His childhood was a living nightmare. He and his deaf-mute brother Yuri were neglected, often left hungry and dressed in rags. He witnessed drunken brawls, casual brutality, and political assassinations within the palace walls. The Boyars would burst into his chambers, unannounced, putting their feet up on his deceased father's bed, showing him nothing but contempt. They saw him not as their sovereign, but as an inconvenience. In one infamous incident, Ivan's friend and protector, a Boyar named Vorontsov, was dragged from the young prince's presence, beaten, and murdered by the Shuiskys. Ivan could only watch in helpless terror. They even tormented him by killing his pets. This constant fear, humiliation, and powerlessness carved deep grooves into his young mind. He learned that the world was a treacherous place, that no one could be trusted, and that the only way to survive was to be more ruthless than your enemies. But amidst the squalor and fear, Ivan found a refuge: books. He was a voracious reader, devouring every text he could find, especially religious scriptures and histories of the Roman and Byzantine empires. He developed a sophisticated intellect and a powerful, eloquent speaking voice. He also developed a profound sense of his own destiny. He wasn't just a prince, he was God's chosen representative on earth. This belief in his divine right to rule became the bedrock of his identity, an unshakable conviction that would justify his every action, no matter how brutal. The Boyars thought they had broken him, but they had only forged him into a weapon. At the age of 16, Ivan decided the game was over. In a move of stunning audacity, he declared he would not be crowned Grand Prince, but something far grander. In January 1547, in the Grand Cathedral of the Dormition in Moscow, Ivan was crowned the first-ever Tsar of all the Russias. The title Tsar, derived from the Roman Caesar, was a monumental statement. It placed him on par with the ancient emperors and the Mongol Khans. It declared that Russia was no longer a mere principality, but a mighty empire, and he was its absolute, divinely appointed ruler. The Boyars who had tormented him were forced to kneel. Just a few weeks later, he married Anastasia Romanovna, a woman chosen from a bridal show of hundreds of noblewomen. It was a marriage of genuine love and affection. Anastasia was a gentle and moderating influence on the volatile young Tsar. For the next 13 years, with Anastasia by his side and a group of capable advisors known as the Chosen Council, Ivan's reign was remarkably progressive and successful. This was his golden age. He wasn't terrible yet. He was Ivan the Great. He introduced a new code of laws, the Sudebnik of 1550, which standardized justice across the realm. He created the Zemski Sabor, a form of parliament to give local nobles a voice in governance. He reformed the military, creating the Streltsy, an elite corps of infantry armed with firearms, the first professional standing army in Russia. He even commissioned the building of the magnificent St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, a riot of color and onion domes that still stands as a symbol of Russia. His greatest triumphs, however, were on the battlefield. For centuries, Russia had been plagued by raids from the Mongol successor states, the Khanates. In 1552, Ivan marched on the fortress city of Kazan, the capital of the Kazan Khanate. It was a massive undertaking. He employed skilled engineers to dig tunnels beneath the city walls and pack them with gunpowder. When the charges were detonated, the walls crumbled and the Streltsy poured in. The conquest was brutal, but for Russia, it was a historic victory. It shattered the power of the Tatars on the Volga and opened up vast new territories for Russian expansion. 4 years later, he conquered the Khanate of Astrakhan, giving Russia control of the entire Volga River and access to the Caspian Sea. Ivan returned to Moscow a hero, a warrior Tsar who had avenged centuries of humiliation. He was at the height of his power and popularity, but the seeds of paranoia, planted in his brutal childhood, were merely dormant. It would take a series of devastating personal blows to make them sprout. The first crack appeared in 1553. Ivan fell gravely ill and was believed to be on his deathbed. He gathered the Boyars and demanded they swear an oath of allegiance to his infant son, Dmitri. To his horror and fury, many refused. They saw an opportunity to seize power, backing Ivan's cousin instead. Ivan miraculously recovered, but he never forgot their treachery. He now had a list of names, a list of traitors who had revealed their true colors when he was at his most vulnerable. The trust was broken. Then, tragedy struck again. While on a pilgrimage, the royal barge carrying the infant Dmitri overturned, and the child drowned. Ivan and Anastasia were devastated, but the blow that would shatter Ivan's world and unleash the monster within came in 1560. His beloved wife, Anastasia, fell ill with a mysterious wasting sickness and died. Ivan was consumed by a grief so profound it bordered on madness. He was utterly convinced she hadn't died of natural causes. He believed his enemies, the treacherous Boyars, had finally found a way to strike at him, by poisoning the only person he truly loved and trusted. Modern forensic analysis of Anastasia's remains has shown unusually high levels of mercury, suggesting he may have been right. For Ivan, this was the ultimate betrayal. His grief curdled into a white-hot rage, a thirst for vengeance that would consume him and his kingdom. The final straw came in 1564. His close friend and one of his most brilliant military commanders, Prince Andrei Kurbsky, fearing he was next on the Tsar's growing list of enemies, defected to Russia's arch-rival Lithuania. He didn't just defect, he led Lithuanian armies against his former countrymen. For Ivan, this was the confirmation of all his deepest fears. Everyone was a traitor. No one could be trusted. The entire noble class was a viper's nest of conspiracy. His mind, already fragile, snapped. In the dead of winter, December 1564, Ivan did something unprecedented. He packed up his family, his treasury, and his most loyal retainers and simply abandoned Moscow. He left without a word, retreating to a fortified settlement called Alexandrov Sloboda. The capital was thrown into chaos. For 2 months, a terrified Russia had no ruler. Finally, he sent 2 letters back to Moscow. The first, addressed to the high church officials, was a blistering tirade against the boyars, clergy, and officials, accusing them all of treason and corruption and announcing his abdication. The second letter, read aloud to the common people in Red Square, assured them that they were not to blame and he held no anger towards them. It was a masterful act of political theater. The populace panicked. They feared a return to the chaos of the boyar rule. They marched to the home of the head of the church and begged him to bring their Tsar back. A delegation was sent to Ivan's gloomy fortress, pleading for his return. Ivan agreed, but on two conditions. First, he would have absolute power to punish traitors as he saw fit, without interference from the church or the Boyar Council. Second, he would create a special new territory within Russia, a state within a state, to be ruled directly by him. This was the birth of the Oprichnina. The name itself is Chilin, derived from an old Russian word for a widow's inheritance, a separate portion of land set aside. Ivan had carved out his own personal kingdom, a domain dedicated to one purpose, purging Russia of treason. And to enforce his will, he created his own personal army, his own fanatical death squad, the Oprichniki. There were 1,000 of them at first, growing to 6,000. They were a brotherhood of terror, dressed in black monastic robes, riding black horses. From their saddles, they hung the grotesque symbols of their mission: a severed dog's head to sniff out treason and a broom to sweep it away from Russia. They were loyal only to Ivan, and they were above all laws but his. For the next 7 years, the Oprichnina unleashed a reign of terror that plunged Russia into a dark age. The Oprichniki were everywhere, their black horses a symbol of impending doom. Accusations were enough to seal one's fate. Boyars were dragged from their homes, their families tortured, their lands confiscated and given to the Oprichniki. The methods of execution were designed for maximum horror. People were impaled, boiled, or frozen to death, torn apart by bears, or slowly roasted over fires. Ivan would often watch, sometimes participating, convinced he was doing God's work, cleansing his holy land of filth. He turned Alexandrov Sloboda into a bizarre, nightmarish monastery. He and his Oprichniki would dress as monks, attending long, morbid church services led by Ivan himself, praying for their victims' souls between sessions of torture and debauchery. The terror reached its hideous apex in 1570, in the prosperous city of Novgorod. Ivan became convinced, based on flimsy evidence, that the entire city was plotting to defect to Lithuania. He led his Oprichniki on a punitive expedition that became one of the most brutal massacres in Russian history. For 5 weeks, the city was systematically destroyed. Thousands of people, men, women, and children, were rounded up each day. They were tortured to reveal hidden wealth, then tied to sleds and dragged into the freezing Volkhov River to drown. Priests and monks were flogged to death. The city was ransacked, its wealth stolen, its churches desecrated. The official chronicle records 1,500 noble victims and mentions an unknown number of commoners, but modern historians estimate the death toll was in the tens of thousands. The once great Republic of Novgorod was left a smoldering, depopulated ruin, its spirit broken forever. No one was safe. Even Metropolitan Philip, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, who dared to publicly condemn the Oprichnina's bloodshed, was arrested, deposed, and later strangled in his cell by one of Ivan's chief henchmen. The Oprichnina eventually spun out of control. While the Oprichniki were terrorizing their own people, they neglected the actual defense of the nation. In 1571, the Crimean Tatars, a threat Ivan's regular army had once contained, broke through the southern defenses and burned Moscow to the ground. The Oprichniki proved utterly useless in a real battle. The disaster forced Ivan to face reality. The Oprichnina had been a catastrophic failure. A year later, he abruptly disbanded it, even making it a crime to speak its name. But the damage was done. He had decimated the nobility, ravaged the economy, and created a climate of absolute fear. His personal life was just as chaotic. After Anastasia's death, he married 6 more times. One wife he likely poisoned after she was found not to be a virgin on their wedding night. Another he sent to a convent. He was a man tormented by his own demons, seeking solace in prayer one moment and indulging in violent rages the next. And then came the act that would define his legacy more than any battle or massacre. In November 1581, the Tsar, now a haggard and unpredictable old man, got into a heated argument with his eldest son and heir, also named Ivan. The younger Ivan was a capable and popular figure, the only person who could temper his father's rages. The cause of the argument is debated. Some say Ivan confronted his father about the brutal siege of Pskov. Others claim the Tsar burst in on his pregnant daughter-in-law, criticizing her for being immodestly dressed and striking her, causing a miscarriage. When his son defended his wife, the Tsar's infamous temper exploded. In a blind fury, Ivan raised his heavy, iron-tipped staff and struck his son on the head. The blow was fatal. The horror of the moment is immortalized in Ilya Repin's famous painting. The Tsar, his eyes wide with a crazed, disbelieving anguish, clutching his dying son, the blood streaming from the wound. The realization of what he had done shattered him completely. For days, he howled in grief, running through the palace, banging his head against his son's coffin. He had not only killed his child, he had killed the future of his dynasty. His only remaining heir was his younger son, Fyodor, who was pious but mentally feeble and unfit to rule. Ivan the Terrible spent his last few years as a broken man, haunted by the ghost of his son, consumed by guilt and paranoia. He surrounded himself with witches and soothsayers, desperately trying to divine the date of his own death. On March 28, 1584, the prophecy came true. The 53-year-old Tsar sat down to play a game of chess, arranged the pieces, and then suddenly collapsed, dead from a stroke. His death was as dramatic as his life. Ivan's legacy is a labyrinth of contradictions. He was a nation builder who nearly destroyed his own nation, a devout Christian who committed sins of biblical proportions. He vastly expanded Russia's territory and consolidated the power of the monarchy, paving the way for future rulers like Peter the Great. But the price was astronomical. His reign of terror, the Oprichnina, became the dark blueprint for future Russian secret police forces. And by killing his heir, he plunged the country into a succession crisis that, after Fyodor's death, led to a devastating period of civil war, famine, and foreign invasion known as the Time of Troubles. So, was he truly Ivan the Terrible? It's interesting to note that his Russian nickname, Grozny, doesn't translate directly to terrible. A more accurate translation would be awe-inspiring, formidable, or menacing, a name that inspires both fear and respect. He was a product of his violent times, a ruler whose brilliance was matched only by his brutality, a tragic figure broken by a horrific childhood, who in his quest to destroy his enemies ended up destroying himself. His reign serves as a terrifying reminder that the line between a powerful leader and a paranoid tyrant is often frighteningly thin.